The Age of Surveillance Capitalism is a 2019 work of social theory by the American author Shoshana Zuboff. Zuboff is a professor of business administration at Harvard and widely recognized as a major authority on the digital world and its impact on contemporary life. The Age of Surveillance Capitalism was shortlisted for the Financial Times Business Book of the Year and the Orwell Prize. At 525 pages, it's a long read, but the bulk of it is evidence in the form of statistics and testimony to support its central claim that society is currently undergoing a transformation at the hands of big tech companies whose ultimate goal is the creation of a pan-social hive mind in which human beings are fully manipulable for the purposes of marketing. That transformation is falsely declared by the tech companies to be inevitable. Although it's a relatively simple thesis, it's open to misinterpretation, as, for example, when the British philosopher John Gray wrote in the New Statesman, Zuboff maintains that this is a totalitarian project. In fact, she's at pains to point out that it's not a totalitarian project. She thinks surveillance capitalism represents a completely new paradigm, a distinct new planet with its own physics of time and space, she calls it at one point, and that attempts to understand it using traditional categories are doomed to fail. Which means she has to invent a new terminology, so we get terms like the coup from above, the division of learning, the means of behavioural modification, ownership of which she thinks eclipses ownership of the means of production as the fountainhead of capitalist wealth and power in the 21st century, and above all, instrumentarianism, defined as the instrumentation and instrumentalization of behavior for the purposes of modification, prediction, monetization, and control. In chapter 13, she presents a chart entitled Two Species of Power, comparing and contrasting totalitarianism and instrumentarianism. The reader might be comforted to learn that whereas the foundational mechanisms of the former include arbitrary terror and murder, the latters are dispossession of the behavioural surplus for the purposes of computation, control, and prediction, which might sound sinister, but at least it doesn't involve extrajudicial killing and torture. At least not yet. Zuboff thinks we're entering a third modernity whose nature it's still within our power to influence. The first involved mass production. The second replaced collectivism with individualism. So roughly what Marxists refer to as the transition from Fordism to post-Fordism. Surveillance capitalism emerged from two opposing vectors. One, the second modernity shift to individualism, and two, the decades-long implementation of neoliberal economic policies designed to reverse individualism. Whereas under totalitarianism, theory legitimates practice, under instrumentarianism, it's the opposite. Practice conceals theory. What that means is that under surveillance capitalism, the means of digital behavioural modification evolves so quickly that the law doesn't usually have time to catch up with it. By the time legislators can be persuaded to address a moral problem, it's dissolved into the new normal. Even though surveillance capitalism uses practice as a means of concealing theory, Zuboff thinks it does have a theory. It's grounded in the thinking of one of the founders of modern psychological behaviorism, the Harvard professor B.F. Skinner, and the man Zuboff claims completes his thought, though she admits he never mentions the old behaviorist, the MIT and Stanford academic Alex Pentland. Skinner believed that human beings do not possess free will. His 1948 novel, Walden 2, describes a utopian world in which scientists use behavioural modification to create a harmonious society. According to Zuboff, Alex Pentland's 2014 book, Social Physics, transforms Skinner's fusty, odd utopia into something that sounds sophisticated, magical, and plausible, using Pentland's own tools and methods to create an expansive vision of a data-driven instrumentarian society governed by computation. Unlike Skinner, Zuboff is a passionate believer in freedom in both the metaphysical and the political sense. She has frequent recourse to Jean-Paul Sartre, Thomas Paine, and Hannah Arendt in support of her moral position. She believes that something like Walden 2 remains the ultimate goal of surveillance capitalism, and that liberty, defined as the right to a future tense, demands that we reject it. If I have one criticism of the age of surveillance capitalism, it's that I'm not sure how seriously to take the surveillance capitalists themselves. They make huge claims about the power of their technology to modify human behavior, but then they're in the business of selling advertising to advertisers. On Google AdWords, a good click-through rate is supposed to be about 5%, which implies a 95% failure. Even so, says Zuboff, you've made 5% of people do an action they wouldn't otherwise have done. But how does she know? And is 5% enough for a Walden too? Nevertheless, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism is a must-read. Zadie Smith called it easily the most important book to be published this century, and added, I find it hard to take seriously any young activist who hasn't at least familiarized themselves with Zuboff's central ideas. I'll second that.